The notes that people gave me, let's talk about leadership. And I can't think of a better time than 1 year ago, the crisis that we went through, not only Morgan Stanley, but clearly the industry. And I want to take you through a week after Lehman Brothers goes bankrupt, Merrill Lynch is bought by Bank of America. And I'm going to start just a little bit of a run-in going to that weekend. This would be September the 12th, 13th, 14th, where we met at the Fed, and then move you very quickly through the week on what was happening to Morgan Stanley and secondarily to Goldman Sachs. Now, going into this crisis, clearly, we knew Bear Stearns sold in the early spring of '08, and then we knew the problems that were going on with Lehman Brothers. So we get a call from Tim Geithner, head of the New York Fed, Friday afternoon, sometime around 5 o'clock, 4:30, and says, John, can you come down to the Fed? We're going to have a meeting. So we get the call, come downtown. We're at Midtown, 48th Street. We get in the car with my CFO. We start down the drive. We get to about 40th Street. Traffic's not moving. It's raining in New York. There's no way we're going to make it downtown to get to the Federal Reserve. My driver, who is a ex-policeman, says to me, hey, boss, you see that bike lane over there? Does that go all the way down to the Battery? I said, yeah, Joe, it does. Next thing I know, we're in the bike lane, going all the way down. We actually got there in 5 minutes. It's amazing. Now, a couple of bikers threw things at us, but we made the meeting and got there on time. Basically, the meeting was about Wall Street coming together to create enough capital to set up a bad bank for Lehman's low-quality assets. And after hemming and hawing and saying, why us, we finally figured out we really needed to do something as an industry. It was clear that Secretary Paulson did not have the political capital to go to Washington after Freddie and Fannie, after Bear Stearns, and get more money. So he was asking the street to help out. The conversation around the table basically was, look, Hank, if we do this, what are you going to do when AIG gets in trouble? Everyone's talking about AIG. And I think John Thain was here not long ago speaking to you, and someone said, how about Merrill Lynch? They're going to be next. So all those things were talked about very openly. So we go through, Bank of America backs away from Lehman, Barclays backs away from Lehman. Lehman declares bankruptcy that night. That's a Sunday night. I think it was the 14th. It may have been the 13th. I knew that Morgan Stanley would be next in line. We went into that week with $181 billion in cash. Not in securities, not in treasuries, not in IBM stock, cash, because we knew there would be a run on the bank. On Monday, our stock started down. I think we went into the week in the low 30s and probably ended up in the mid-20s after the first day. We were 2 days away on Wednesday of announcing our earnings, which were very strong earnings. On Tuesday morning, given the way the market acted on Monday, we were thinking about, should we accelerate our earnings? Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman announced their earnings Tuesday morning, right before the opening. I think they had like a 7% return on equity. And this crisis was, I thought, very good. We were to announce on Wednesday, and we said, no, let's accelerate. We'll do it Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday afternoon, we announced our earnings, 16.2% return on equity, 1.8 billion PBT. Next day, our stock opens down 30%. And just so you understand what was going on, fund managers would come into Morgan Stanley and somewhat to Goldman, but we were the next in line. They would ask at 2:45 for all their credit balances and their margin balances, short our stock, and buy credit derivative swaps. So as the spread on credit derivative swaps got wider, it's an indication your credit is weaker. And then the clearing banks would call, Credit Suisse, JPMorgan, Deutsche Bank. If you want us to clear for you, you need to post $10 billion more in collateral. So that was the spin we were in, money running out the door. It was a classic run on the bank. And, Lloyd, again, at Blankfein at Goldman, and I talked constantly. And he always kept saying, John, you got to hold on because I'm 20 seconds behind you. So the whole game was to hold on, to find other sources of capital. At the same time, you were reading the paper, or you would turn on CNBC, and you would see, and I gave Maria Bartiromo grief about this, you would see, does Morgan Stanley make it? Which, if you're an employee of our firm, or an investor in our firm, or a client of our firm, you have grave concerns. So we had a number of town hall meetings in trying to say to people, here's what's going on, here are the facts, you need to know what's rumor and what's not rumor. So in our first meeting, after the stock was getting crushed, after our earnings report, I led off with, if you want to sell your stock, sell it. We're not keeping notes on who sells and who doesn't sell. You need to be comfortable with your personal situation. And then we went through some of the rumors. And the point I tried to make to them, that let's not focus on it. There's going to be a rumor a minute. What you need to focus on is your colleagues, your clients, and make sure they know as much as you can tell them about markets and our position. And then we did a Q&A, and I'd answer any question anyone asked. It was very open, very forthright. And they had more information, I am told, versus their colleagues who had been at other firms that were also going through this right before us. I think the key thing that I said to them, this is not the time to be angry. This is not the time to say it's someone's fault. This is the time to focus on the firm and your clients. That careers are long careers. We don't want to get even. We want to do business, and we want to stabilize the firm. So on Wednesday, with the stock continuing to fall, we had called one of our investors, CIC, which is one of the super wealth funds in China, who we had done some transactions with and had invested in us a year earlier. They came in, and good friends of mine, but the Chinese love to negotiate. And in our first round, a year earlier, we came into a room, not quite this big, but they sat on one side, we sat on one side, and we spent 4 days kind of working our way to the middle. And once we had a deal, they said, wasn't that a lot of fun? And at that time, when you don't need the money, it was a lot of fun. We actually enjoyed it. It was give and take and push and argue and debate. But this time, we did not have the luxury of starting on the other side of the room. We started right in the middle. And for a lot of reasons, we could not come to an agreement. At the same time, Tim Geithner, head of New York Fed, who I think had done just a superb job, was calling me saying, what is plan B? What are you going to do? And, we were talking to the Chinese. We had put out a feeler to the Japanese. We talked to Buffett. We talked to everyone and trying to figure out how can you put some calmness into this market and get people to stop the run on the bank. On Wednesday, it was clear, in talking to my management committee, and we did everything as a team, it was clear they felt like we needed an alternative. So I'd received a call from Vikram Pandit at Citi, as many of you know, used to work at Morgan Stanley. And he said, great earnings, if you need us, we're here to help you. I got a call from Jamie Dimon, great earnings, if you need us, we're here to help you. Then I got a call from one of the vice chairmen at Citi, said, great earnings, we'd love to merge with you. So on Thursday, I called Vikram and said, you've said you want to merge, we'd be interested in talking to you. He said, we'd love to do it. I'll come back to you, I need to talk to my board. Jamie Dimon had called my CFO and called James Gorman, who will be CEO in 3 months, And they were saying they called, Jamie called them and asked, what can I do to help you? What's going on? Things like that. Clearly, John, the reason they're calling us, he wants to do a deal. So I called Jamie and I said, Jamie, you're calling my CFO and my president. Clearly, you must want to do a deal. Is that why you're calling? He said, no, I was just calling to be helpful. And I said, if you want to be helpful, you talk to me. You don't talk to my CFO and CEO, president. We need to do business. We got to be direct. I don't want you going around me. It was an information gathering exercise. I don't blame him for it. Maybe I would have done the same thing. So we go through Wednesday, Thursday. No one really wants to do a deal. Our stock is probably in the, I'm going to guess, low teens. Tim Geithner is constantly saying, what is plan B? Why don't you call Jamie? I said, well, I talked to Jamie. He has no interest in the firm. So we get into Friday. Again, I get a call from the Fed. We want you to find a partner. Would you talk to so-and-so? I said, I've done that. They don't want the firm. And if they did want the firm, they would pay no price for it. On Friday afternoon, we found out that the Japanese had interest in talking to us. And they would call me at 6 a.m. Monday morning Tokyo time, which would be Sunday afternoon in New York at 5 p.m. Hank Paulson, through all this, was probably the most supportive of all the regulators, calling and saying, we're going to get through this. We need an independent Morgan Stanley and others. There was only one other. He didn't have to use the name. And we talked constantly on ways of raising money, of working with the Chinese, working with Vice Premier Wan Qishan, who I know really well and Hank knows really well. But by Friday, we were getting nowhere. We'd been turned down at every place we've gone. Lloyd called me and said, do you think if we were a bank holding company, that would help us through this crisis? And I said, clearly in the long run it would. I'm not sure if in the short run if it would. But started to do some work on looking at being a bank holding company. The board is called in for Saturday because I'm not sure if we will make it. So the board comes in on a Saturday. We have our first meeting. We take them through the situation. It looks dire. We don't know about the Japanese. That is really our hope, and or would the federal government do anything to help us? Again, milling around, and our next meeting was going to be that evening, Saturday evening. So I think the lowest point for me came Saturday afternoon. I got a call from Hank Paulson. And Hank said, John, the markets are fragile. We cannot have Monday morning open without a solution to your firm. You have to find a partner. And I was pretty aggressive on pushing back. I said, Hank, you've been my biggest supporter. You've been helping us the whole way. Now you're breaking away. I can't believe, given everything you've said to me during the week, now this is happening. He said, look, John, it's not about Morgan Stanley. It's about financial meltdown on a global basis. You need to find a partner. I said, well, look, I believe that the Japanese are going to invest in us, and that's my partner. He said, you and I both know they will never make a decision that quickly. And I said, Hank, I don't know that. They hired us to do a hostile takeover of a minority piece of Union Bank. Japanese firms are not known for doing hostiles. They did the hostile. They listened to us. We bought the minority piece. They stayed true to their word. I believe they'll invest. So Hank and I agreed to disagree. Hung up the phone and just really had to pull myself together because I felt Hank was the one person who really understood the culture, the business, what Morgan Stanley meant, not just to the people of the firm, but also in the financial system. So we go to the board, we take them through it. Now the board has hired outside advisors, outside law firm, an outside investment bank, small boutique bank. Most of the people are staying, spending the night in the office. We come in Sunday, the board doesn't come into midday. We really have nothing to do. We're waiting. for 5 o'clock afternoon, which would be Sunday morning in Tokyo. So my secretary walks in and says, John, Hank Paulson's on the phone. So for some reason, I got up from my desk, I walked over to my couch, and I picked up the phone. Hank said, John, I'm on here with Ben Bernanke and Tim Geithner. We want to talk to you. And I said, well, Hank, I'd like to put my general counsel on the phone. So we hit the speaker button. So Gary Lynch, my general counsel, and I are on the phone. But again, there are 15, 20 people in the room. And the conversation goes something like this. We're worried about financial markets on a global basis. This is Hank speaking. We cannot have chaos on Monday morning. We need you to do something with your firm. Ben Bernanke said, John, we see things you don't see. This is much bigger than any one firm. It's about a global crisis, and we have to have a solution, and we need a solution for your firm. And Tim Geithner, who had been very persistent about Plan B, said, I want you to call Jamie Dimon at JP, and he'll buy your bank. And I want to stop there for a second because a number of people have asked me internally, well, were you upset with them? Did you think they were doing the right thing or the wrong thing? Well, I disagreed with them, but I'm not upset with them. Their job is to have financial stability. My job is to protect the firm and keep it going. It wasn't nefarious, it wasn't mean, it was just practical. They did a superb job. So Tim Geithner says to me, call Jamie. I said, Tim, I've called Jamie. He doesn't want the firm. He wants it now. I said, no, he doesn't. I've spoken to him. He does not want the firm. Call him, he'll buy the firm. I said, yeah, he'll buy the firm for $1. Don't laugh, that was the price. I said, let me ask you a question, the three of you. I have 45,000 employees. In New York City, AIG, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, and other layoffs, there's probably 40,000 jobs have been lost. From a public policy point of view, does this make sense? Tim said it's not about public policy. It's about stability. And that's what we're focused on, and we want you to do something with your firm. So I said, I think very calmly, I think people in the room would say that, I have the utmost respect for the three of you. What you do for this country makes you patriots. But I have 45,000 employees. I won't do it. I'll take the firm down. Click. That was the conversation. So you're in there, and it's surreal because you're going through this, trying to protect the firm, trying to do what's right. They're trying to do their job. So now, in 30 minutes, I'm on the phone with the Japanese. Paul Taubman and Jian Lee, who's his chief of staff, are in there with me. The door's shut. And I speak into the phone to my partner in Tokyo. I'll wait 10 seconds, 30 seconds. He does the translation. I'll wait. He talks back and forth. It's very if you've been with interpreters, you got to stay very focused on what you're going to say. So my secretary comes in and says, Tim Geithner's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I tell Tim I got to call him back. I'm on the phone with the Japanese. We go back to the conversation. I talk, I wait, back and forth. My secretary comes in and says, Hank Paulson's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. All I can tell you, I'm wired now. Tell Hank I'll call him back. I'm on the phone with the Japanese. Go back and forth, back and forth. She comes back in about 3 or 4 minutes and says, Tim Geithner's on the phone and he wants to talk to you now. Tell Tim Geithner to get. When you come that close to really going out of business, call it near death, death experience, the end of the world, whatever you want to call it, your only focus is to make sure your company survives. I had no fear of the three of them. They were doing their job. I had to do my job. The team around me were superb. We communicated, we worked together, we had single focus, and we got it to work. We did survive. I went home, went to the city. My wife came into the city, and we went over to my kids' apartments. And I went in, and I said to Christy, Chris, I may lose the firm. Emotional. I go into the living room, walk around, get my composure. I come back and I said to her, but I'd rather be doing this than reading a book in North Carolina. The action was wild. The team was unbelievable. And how people worked, from my experience, it was, I never want to go through it again, but I'm glad I went through it once. In these points on leadership, and you don't call yourself a leader. People say you're a leader. All I know is that one thing I could not do was let my team see how concerned I was. And I don't think they ever did. And I tried to oftentimes make light of what was going on or make jokes. One of the things I did, I had a handheld blood pressure gauge. So we go to meetings and I'd say, check your blood pressure. And matter of fact, one of my guys actually went to the hospital after he checked his blood pressure. We found out it was stress. Also, it was over one of the Jewish holidays, and he had told me that last year his 12-year-old son, who didn't have to fast, would come in and eat food in front of him all the time to punish him. And so I decided to, even though I was not being disrespectful, I had a pizza delivered every hour on the hour for 7 hours. He said his housekeeper really liked it, and he thought it was very funny that during the crisis I'm thinking about silly things like that. I think you had to keep a sense of humor. The stress and the intensity was more than anything I've ever seen. And what my guys don't know, when my CFO walked out of my office and said we're going to be out of money in 3 days, I shut the door and I don't think I've ever taken deeper breaths than I took after he walked out the door. But that was all in my office by myself, just trying to stay focused. So the key is, some of these things were very straightforward on leadership. Clearly, we recognized it was a crisis. We communicated at least 6 or 7 times with all of our employees on a global network, so they knew what we knew. We never sugarcoated it. We told them the truth from day one. Everyone knew how serious it was. Everyone trusted us. We had a lot of integrity. They knew we weren't trying to trick them. I never said, go buy the stock. I said, if it makes you feel better, sell the stock. A lot of people sold the stock. I don't know who they are. I don't want to know, and I don't care. People had to be comfortable. We had to set a tone that, as much as the crisis was tough, I think if you talk to my executives, I went out of my way. I never forget coming out of the meeting with the Japanese, and I saw my chief of staff, and I said, it was the last day the Yankees were playing in Yankee Stadium. I said, I thought you were going to the Yankee game. Always trying to deflect and say there were other things to do, things to talk about, things to joke about. So I guess the point you want to walk away with And I don't know if it's leadership or responsibility. But when you take on jobs, it doesn't have to be a big job, you have a responsibility to do what you think is right and stand up sometimes when the odds are against you and people are pushing you. I think there are enough stories you can read about in the paper where if people would have done that, they wouldn't be in the pickle they're in now. So I guess if you leave here, the thing to think about is stand up for what you believe in, do what you think's right, be prepared to suffer the consequences, but don't be pushed around when you know in your heart of heart it's the wrong thing to do.